Another film that stands as an important piece of history. Another classic. Another first. The Wizard of Oz burst into theaters in 1939, dazzling audiences everywhere with its dramatic and beautiful visuals. Often misconstrued as being the very first film in color, it is perhaps better to say that it's one of the first to portray it so vibrantly and strikingly. It's another cornerstone of popular culture. Everybody knows this one. Its characters, setting, and songs like Somewhere Over the Rainbow and We're Off to See the Wizard are incredibly iconic. It's the perfect fantasy film about a girl who dreams of a world far greater than the one she lives in, and she experiences it all, and then some. It's got all it needs: great acting, a charming story, lovable characters with timeless whimsy, and oh yeah, plenty of terrors for all the kiddies to enjoy. Similar to Snow White, this movie is an older classic, thus it was a first for many adults and kids alike. The production was a massive spectacle. The fantastic elements seemed so bright and so very wonderful, which made the eerie and dark scenes all the more terrifying. Though this film is rather tame as far as that goes, there are a few noteworthy things worth mentioning, especially the antagonist. She's probably caused more nightmares than monsters under the bed ever have. Margaret Hamilton plays the ever-classic Wicked Witch of the West, clad in green makeup, black robes, a pointy hat, and black magic at her disposal. Her performance in this movie is enough to just put it in the series alone, simply because her character is so frightening. For the most part, the movie does go pretty light on the creeps, except when she's brewing up her arcane evil, but we'll get to that later. Let's take a look at the story first. It's rather simple, albeit with a very interesting twist. Well, interesting for 1939. As the film begins in sepia, we meet Kansas girl Dorothy Gale in the midst of a predicament. Her dog Toto has bit the neighbor lady, the evil Mrs. Gulch, and she plans to
make sure he's destroyed.
Dorothy's family is for the most part apathetic to this situation, seeing that the law is law. But Dorothy, who loves her dog to pieces, is utterly devastated by Mrs. Gulch's plans to take Toto to the sheriff to be put down. Though Mrs. Gulch does take Toto and leave, the dog manages to escape and run back to his master. After this ordeal, Dorothy has had enough feeling like nobody cares about her, and she doesn't want to incur the wrath of Gulch, so she decides to pack up and run away, with Toto in tow. Not too long after she leaves, she stumbles upon a traveling magician, who really just turns out to be nothing more than a con man, who convinces her to return home, and just in time too. A violent tornado is headed across the plains, and Dorothy makes it home with mere seconds to spare. In a most impressive sequence, as video editing was all done by hand, without computers or any digital effects, we see her trying to find her family, attempting to get into the storm cellar, and eventually being forced to surrender and finding cover in the house. However, the storm was more violent than considered, and the house was ripped from its foundation and sent spiraling within the cyclone. After much chaos and even a flying cow, the house lands with a jolt. No sounds of a remaining twister, only a very eerie silence. As Dorothy ventures out the front door, we realize that we're not in Kansas anymore, and everything is now vibrantly colored in the fantastical world of Oz. Not long after Dorothy starts wandering about Munchkin Land, Glinda, the Good Witch of the North, appears to ask her if she's a good witch or a bad witch. Confused, Dorothy asks her what she means. As it turns out, when her house landed in Oz, it crushed the Wicked Witch of the East, and Glinda concludes that Dorothy must be some sort of witch, despite the fact that she is just a simple girl from Kansas who desperately just wants to go home. Dorothy learns that in killing the Wicked Witch of the East, she's freed the Munchkins from her evil tyranny, and they'll now finally be able to live in peace and freedom. After much fanfare, the Wicked Witch of the West explodes into the town, demanding to know who killed her sister. That aside, the Witch of the West demands her sister's ruby slippers, for they hold great power. When she turns to claim them, however, the slippers disappear, and the Witch of the East's striped legs grotesquely curl and recoil under the house. The ruby slippers instead chose Dorothy, which makes her twice as big a target in the Wicked Witch of the West's eyes. After threatening her and her, she departs in a cloud of smoke and fire to plot Dorothy's demise. But Dorothy is still no closer to returning home. She's told to consult the famed, the powerful, the Wizard of Oz, a man who can fulfill any request and will absolutely help anyone in need. But however will she find the Emerald City to get to him? Why, follow the yellow brick road, of course. Along the way, she meets the Scarecrow, who lacks a brain, the Tin Man, who lacks a heart, and the Cowardly Lion, who lacks courage. The four, with Toto at their side, all plan to see the wizard in order to have their wishes granted. Along the way, the Wicked Witch of the West does her best to stop them from reaching the Emerald City, ultimately failing. But that doesn't mean the group is in the clear just yet. The Wicked Witch creates a smoke ultimatum in the sky, telling Dorothy to surrender. Because of this, the wizard permits them an audience. His appearance is striking, to say the least. A massive green head, shrouded in smoke and fog, flanked by plumes of fire. The wizard is an imposing and powerful figure, speaking in a booming voice, lashing out insults left and right.
You clinking, clanking, clattering collection of colliginous junk!
After the group makes their requests, he says he will oblige, so long as they bring him the broom of the Wicked Witch of the West. Not long after the group begins to approach her fortress, the witch sends her winged monkey minions on the prowl, with orders to kidnap Dorothy and Toto. The Tin Man and Cowardly Lion are scared off, and the Scarecrow is essentially disemboweled. After collecting themselves, but mostly pieces of Scarecrow, the trio infiltrates the castle, disguised as Winkies, to save Dorothy, whom the Wicked Witch of the West now holds captive in her chambers, threatening to kill Toto unless Dorothy gives her the ruby red slippers. Her friends save her in the nick of time, however, and the Wicked Witch is defeated when they accidentally splash her with a bucket of water intended to extinguish the Scarecrow, who was set ablaze. Upon returning to the Emerald City and presenting the broomstick, the group was subject to even more of the wizard's yammering, until Toto pulls back a curtain to reveal that the mysterious, all-powerful wizard is merely a man with a machine to alter his persona. He provides the group with what they desire, assuring them that they already had a heart, a brain, and courage beforehand. He then inaugurates the Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Cowardly Lion to rule in his stead, as he plans to leave to take Dorothy back to Kansas personally in his hot air balloon. However, just as they're about to leave, Toto slips out and runs off, forcing Dorothy to chase after him, consequently missing the balloon. Thankfully, a Glinda ex machina arrives to tell her that all she needs to do is click her heels together 3 times and think to herself, "There's no place like home." The power to go home was well within her grasp the whole time, rendering the entire adventure essentially pointless. Well, thanks for nothing. Upon returning to Kansas, Dorothy wakes up in her bed to realize that this was all a dream, and that nearly all of the people she had associated with recently were actually embodied as the characters in Oz, the Tin Man, Scarecrow, and Cowardly Lion being farmhands, and the Wicked Witch of the West emulated by mean Mrs. Gulch. Even if it all was just a dream, it's given Dorothy a newfound love and perspective for her home and the people around her. How charming. There's no denying that this film is utterly delightful and timeless, but some of the content and myths about it, however, more than qualify this movie for the series. The most obvious being the Wicked Witch of the West. This woman is just terrifying. Whenever she's on screen, she demands the attention of every viewer. Her striking, evil design remains one of the go-to mental images for witches to this day. She's got practically no character development, but that's what makes her so unsettling. She's pure evil, constantly on the warpath and hungering for destruction. We don't know why. We know nothing about her. We just know that she's a wicked, mean old witch, and will stop at nothing to get what she wants. Margaret Hamilton's performance is nothing short of brilliant. You can tell that she's fully into this character, and loving every minute of it. She desires nothing more than to manipulate and terrify. Her evil schemes and nefarious laughter are still enough to send kids running for cover to this very day. Oh, and not to mention, Margaret Hamilton used to be a kindergarten teacher. Imagine dealing with something like that when you stepped out of line.
I'll give you any advice.
In addition, her servants are just all sorts of creepy. The wickedly cackling and flying monkeys that kidnap Dorothy and Toto and disembowel the Scarecrow are incredibly sinister. I keep saying disembowel when I reference the Scarecrow in this scene, because that's exactly what happened. Despite his innards consisting of some friendly-looking hay, if the Scarecrow were human, that would be his intestines that they were gutting, which would be incredibly gruesome. It's commonly overlooked how sick this concept actually is, given the substitution. These winged terrors dominated the skies at the witch's bidding. Their manic behavior and evilly grinning faces make them all the more terrifying. But that's not all she employs. The Winkies, a people she's enslaved to be her guards, are reminiscent of a cross between the Wicked Witch herself and the British Royal Guard. With green faces and eldritch chanting as they march, these guardsmen seem as formidable and unstoppable as the witch herself, an extension of her power. Although they're freed by the end of the movie when the witch is defeated, they still make for a very imposing group. The chanting resonates within one's head long after the movie is finished, when all the lights are out. And of course, one cannot forget the actual death scene of the Wicked Witch of the West. Though it's ultimately simple how she's defeated, getting water thrown on her, it's kind of disturbing but yet satisfying to watch this evil woman melt into a puddle of nothingness as she is finally defeated. And one simply cannot forget the wizard himself, with his massive green head and over-the-top and intimidating pyrotechnic show. This guy wasn't quite the image that kids were expecting to see after all they'd heard about the wonderful Wizard of Oz. This guy seemed like he would be the villain if he were in any other movie. Before his actual reveal, he certainly put the whiz in wizard. That's really all there is for disturbing content within the movie itself. It's pretty light on all the creep factors, perhaps more so than Snow White. But what this movie does have that Snow White lacks is some pretty fascinating urban legends that are mostly all true, save for a few. These stories, in a way, make everything feel much more sinister when reconsidered, as the bright colors and upbeat tone convey one message, while some of the darker, real facts go in the exact opposite direction. Probably the most unnerving of these is the fact that real people were actually injured when making this film. True, it was inadvertent, but that still doesn't make the skin crawl any less. Take, for example, the Tin Man. He was originally slated to be played by Buddy Ebsen. He had 4 weeks of rehearsal down and all of the songs recorded, but ended up having to be rushed to the hospital due to lung failure. Why? The silvery, shiny face paint being used on him was a mixture of clown paint and aluminum dust, and this led to a devastating lung infection. He spent 2 weeks in the hospital and another month recovering at home. Unfortunately, he had to be recast, and Jack Haley took his place. But it doesn't stop there. Margaret Hamilton, the Wicked Witch of the West, also faced a condition very similar to Mr. Ebsen's. Her green skin was achieved through the use of a copper-based makeup that would be fatal if ingested. As such, she had to exist on a mainly liquid diet while on set. For several weeks after shooting had wrapped up, her skin remained tinged green and burned from the toxic concoction. It gets worse, too. Remember that scene in the poppy fields where the group falls under the witch's sleeping spell and Glinda saves them with a snow ex machina? Of course it isn't real snow that's being used. That wouldn't have been very practical or possible. Instead, they used a friendly, fluffy substance known as asbestos. One can only imagine how often the cast was exposed to that hazardous fuzz, what with its abundance on set and repeated takes. But there's one more legend that rises above the rest, the most chilling of them all, something that could raise the hair on anyone's arms. The Munchkin suicide. As if these little guys weren't creepy enough to begin with. The story goes that if you look carefully in the background, to the right of the cabin, as the Tin Man's reprise of "We're Off to See the Wizard" comes to a close, you can quite clearly see the silhouette of a body swinging from a tree. According to this legend, there's no two ways about it. The dead body can clearly be seen, rocking back and forth in the cold wind. The tale goes that it was either a Munchkin who was treated very poorly on set, which does have some evidence as these things did indeed happen, or it was one whose unrequited love for a female Munchkin drove him to suicide. Either way, a man is dead, and audiences have been witness to a dark suicide amidst a bright fantasy for decades. Wrong! This whole hanged Munchkin thing makes for a good story and some pretty creepy footage, but here's the truth. It's total bullshit. Here's the first thing to note. There are absolutely no reliable sources to back this up. Folks will swear up and down that this is real, and that their uncle worked on the set or that their VHS copy had it, so on and so on. But when asked to provide proof, they're unable to do so. Nobody can replicate this scene. The only place it appears is on the channel of a user known as Suicidal Munchkin. He is the genesis of this myth, as his video, seen here, is the only one that can be found when searching for proof. He cleverly added a watermark and logo URL to his videos, but this ultimately shot the story in the foot. If you search on other channels for this footage, you can indeed find it, but they're all just re-uploads of his video. The watermarks are either clearly visible or badly edited out through terrible effects of zoom crop usage. Furthermore, anybody well-versed in video editing can tell that his VHS proof is merely an edited DVD copy made to look old through the use of static, jitter, and color damage effects. It's far too sharp to be from a VHS as well, no matter how much editing has been done. He insists that this is an original VHS copy and that the corpse was edited out in the remasters. but this is completely untrue. On top of his video being the only one that has this proof, there have been many videos of people showing their original VHS tapes of the film to reveal indeed that there was no body there, and that it was a crane the whole time. The original and remasters are completely identical. Also, there is no mention of any such change on moviecensorship.com, a website that painstakingly details differences between different movie releases, such as the difference between a director's cut and the theatrical cut of a film. If such an edit were truly made, what with the fascination behind it being what it is, there would be documentation of it. 2 more points to really hit things home. There is clear proof and evidence that this scene was filmed far before anything involving the Munchkins was filmed. No Munchkin actors were on set at the time, much less dealing with the cruel treatment during the process. Finally, the big one to put the last nail in the coffin is the fact that there is one big mistake that gives it away that this is an edit job. True, it's a very well done one, but it's not perfect. In all versions of this scene, a crane can be seen extending its wings in this screen area, seen here. Some people actually say that this is the real suicide scene, but they've got something wrong with their eyes. That is undoubtedly a bird. But I digress. However, in Suicidal Munchkin's edited version, the hanged body is where the crane's body is, which of course led to the insistence that the crane was added to cover it all up. But here's the hitch. Even if the actual proof from other users showing their authentic old VHS copies of this hasn't done it for you, this one will. You may not be able to see it at first, but look carefully enough, and you will. The creator of this hoaxed edit did a very good job of masking out the crane and replacing it with the body, but they overlooked something crucial. The tips of the bird's wings. Though small and very difficult to see, one can indeed notice that on the other side of the 2 trees that flank the corpse, the tips of each of the crane's wings can clearly be discerned. The editor failed to mask these out, thus revealing unequivocally that the hanged Munchkin is indeed a hoax. A well-done illusion, but not without its holes that were easily torn wide open, ripping the rumor to shreds. Though that wasn't the intention of this video, it was something that absolutely had to be addressed, so you can consider this myth entirely debunked. Sure, it makes for a great story, and the edit is terribly creepy and pretty well done, aside from the oversights. It definitely gave me a scare when I first delved into it, but now you know. That's all the Wizard has for us this week. I hope you enjoyed the experience, as always. I'll be looking for you next week as we make our return to Oz.